Thanks for joining us today for today's session. So we will, for the next hour or so, discuss digital transformation for industrials in particular. So what challenges are lying ahead, how others are dealing with that, and what you should be aware of in this area. As always in these kind of settings, a couple of housekeeping rules up front. The session is being recorded. So we will also have the chance to review the session afterwards and will be shared with the follow-up communication. If you have any questions, feel free to use the Zoom chat function. We will pick it up. If for whatever reason we will not have enough time to cover it, feel free to also leave your name and we will be very happy to follow up afterwards with you and then get back to you with any questions you may have. First of all, who am I? I'm Florian Tannen. I'm a partner at the Munich office of Baker McKenzie. I'm dealing with tech law and digitalization all around the clock. On top of that, privacy. And I also have the privilege to serve as the head of digital transformation for our IMT's industry group. IMT stands for Industrial Manufacturing and Transportation in that regard. And I also have the pleasure to be the host today. For the next hour or so, we've pulled together a good team of panelists, both from the Baker McKenzie side of things and from our external speakers from Amazon and Porsche. Before I introduce them, we made sure that we have a good range of topics from both the regulatory side of things, from the more consumer protection side of things, privacy side of things, thanks to Florian from Amazon, and also how companies are dealing with ever-growing and ever-raising cybersecurity and IT requirements, like, for example, Sebastian is covering on. So I'm joined today by Claire Dietz-Polte. Claire Dietz-Polte is a partner in our Berlin office, and she co-heads the German energy infrastructure team and is particularly focusing on the digital transformation in the energy and the infrastructure sector. Then I'm also joined by our Raffaele Giarda from our Rome office. He co-leads the corporate and M&A practice and is in charge of the TMT, the Technology, Media, Telecoms Industry Group in our Italian offices. And he is regularly speaking about tech law, tech legal and regulatory issues, and is joined by Andrea Messetti, also from our Rome office and part of the information technology and communications team. He is advising companies in particular in IT, electronic communications, and with a particular reference to the regulatory aspects of new technologies. And then special thanks to our external speakers. I mentioned Florian Harms already from Amazon. He is Amazon's Director of Data Privacy for Europe and also covering that more broadly globally. And besides being a German qualified lawyer, he's also a French qualified lawyer. He knows both sides of the table. So he was in law firms prior to joining Amazon, and he will share a little bit about how does digital transformation and the more digitalization change also the work for a privacy team in-house and how a company like Amazon tackles that. And then last but not least, Sebastian Rockstroh from Porsche. He is a legal counsel for IT and smart mobility matters. And Sebastian has worked also on both sides of the table for several years for Orrick, Harrington, Sutcliffe in Munich. He then joined Siemens in working similar matters as he does now for Porsche, obviously not car related, but also tech related, and joined Porsche in 2020 and is doing now matters all around car IT. So we want to tackle the topic of digital transformation. And what we see is that in particular the industrials and in the manufacturing area, we see a lot of challenges with embracing and implementing change that is driven by digital transformation and the digitalization. And this is in particular because this sector is more than others perhaps disrupted by new business models, by new technology. For example, by moving from a pure manufacturer to a manufacturer that needs to become also an IT and software company on top of that, and as well as to keep up with the market and the fact that they are not only having competitors that are their peers in the same sector, but that there are also competitors entering the market from other sectors, like from the tech sector, which is a new challenge as well. Also, the role of our industrials significantly changes. We see that, for example, from just purely selling products after having manufactured them, obviously, for a long time, more and more of them also move into the role of a service provider, which is obviously a very, very different setup for someone selling hardware products to become someone who has a long-standing, long relationship with customers, or even moving from B2B into a B2C relationship as well. We see this a lot, for example, in the automotive sector. Sebastian might have a word or two on that later in the session. And then on the other hand, we have a very rapid implementation of digital tools, of IT tools, of software tools. We have things like agile work that is entering also the workforce in our industrials, which is obviously something where the tech side and the tech companies have much more embraced that because they have a longer time applying this way of working. And it's a new thing for the industrials as well. And last but not least, and we hear, for example, from Claire about that a little bit more, we have a lot of things going on the regulatory side. So there's a lot of new rules either already there or emerging in the area of tech. Just think about AI-related regulations, think about cybersecurity, and obviously also privacy, then all around the data economy. So there's also on the just legal side of things, a lot of things happening that add to this challenge for our industrials in the digital transformation area. We will try now to shed some light on that in the next couple of minutes until 1 p.m. CET. And we will start with our first panelist, and I would like to hand over to Raffaele Giarda. And Raffaele, the floor is yours to kick us off.
Thank you very much, Florian, and thank you very much to all of you for being with us today. We thought that to look at this journey, which is the digital transformation, it would be a good kickstart to go with mobility. And what better example than vehicles, which transformed from certainly cars with fantastic engines in with it to a different user experience, to mobility experiences for companies and for users. In order to see where the trends are going, it's always useful to see where we all started. And we consider the starting point something that happened in 2015, a European regulation that required all new models of cars to be equipped, starting with 31 March 2018, with something called eCall. The eCall is essentially an in-vehicle emergency call to the Pan-European Emergency Service 112, which is made either automatically by means of in-vehicle activated sensors or manually in case of a serious accident, in order to create and establish a channel communication between the car and something called PSAP, Public Safety Answering Point. And that call would essentially send a set of data like the vehicle identification number, the type of engine, the propelling, the fuel, and most of all, the location and the direction of travel, in order to make sure that in case of a serious accident, the car will be able to communicate with PSAP and get rescues right away. So it starts from a safety point. But once you have opened up the world of the car to the World Wide Web through a portal, through a connection, at that point, the entire world opens up, because you do not have any more just the safety issues, which is important for the European Union to reach the long-term goal of having 0 casualties and serious injuries by 2050. But it's also important to get all sorts of services in within the car: infotainment, broadcasting, gaming, communication, diagnostic, analytics, and the like. Now, this also provides an interesting development in terms of where the market is going. Just to make an example with Italy, already in 2021, we had something like 1.92 billion value of market in terms of connected cars, and almost 1 out of 2 vehicles were considered as connected. Now we have to sort of identify what connected means, because there is a different level of connection, a different level of automation in the car. And if we look at the international difference and international identification of categories of automation that was ranked and prepared by something called the SAE, the Society of Automotive Engineers. There are 5, or we should say better, 6 different levels, because the first level is 0, no automation. And then there are 5 different levels of automation, depending on the interaction between the vehicle and the human being. And when we say connected in that case, and we say almost 1 out of 2 cars were connected, we refer already to the SAE automation level number 2 and number 3. Now, this has opportunities, but at the same time, also, as Florian was mentioning in the introduction, disruptive effect on business models. In the past, we were used to see a car manufacturer on the one end and an end user, a customer, on the other hand. But now all these lines connecting the various players like telecom providers, providers of machine-to-machine services, IT platforms, additional players, enablers, they are all connected one with the other. And depending on how the business model works, there are different regulatory challenges. Regulatory challenges, cybersecurity issues, consumer law, industry regulation, insurance regulation, and the like. But here is one of the opportunities, because the usual struggle is that technology moves faster than regulation. It did take a while, in fact, to have machine-to-machine services find their way and find their full citizenship within the regulation at the European level. But we now have something called the new Electronic Communication Code at the European level, which was launched via a directive in 2018, and which is now implemented by almost every member state, which essentially already identifies and regulates M2M and IoT services within the definition of electronic communication services. One could say, so what is the big thing? Why it is important to have something regulated or defined within the new electronic communications code? And the answer is that in addition to be regulated, because for instance, if you want to provide ECS, electronic communication services, we love acronyms, as you may have said, as you may have heard, you need to be authorized in most of the countries. However, for instance, there is also opportunities, because when you buy a SIM card for normal communications, you need to be first identified before the service is activated. But that identification, which has to do with combating crime and terrorism and making sure that security is there, is not needed for an embedded SIM card that is actually in the car, provided that that SIM card cannot be disinstalled from the car, and if so, cannot communicate voice or text or create a connection with the internet. So that's an opportunity of creating a more agile business model, because we know that in practical terms, this identification of the end user with prepaid cards is sometimes a little bit of a nightmare. Another point, what networks? The European Union debated a little bit about which network should be privileged, Wi-Fi, 5G or others. And first, the favor seemed to be in favor of Wi-Fi, but now it seems that 5G, with its latency, with its pervasive nature, is the name of the game, at least in the European Union view. Another point that is interesting to note is that if you want to have a car that is connected and that is equipped with an embedded eSIM, let's say in France, that drives into Italy, can that car continue to benefit from the same services that it benefits from in France, even though it goes in different networks because of a different country, Italy in the example we made? And that is now possible because there are certain numbering plans that have been amended in order to make sure that a SIM issued in France is recognized, in the example I made, it could be Germany, it could be Austria, is recognized also within Italy as if it had been issued by an Italian operator under the auspices of an Italian authority. And this is because there are 2 pillars that are also interesting to note. A couple of recommendations from the so-called CEPT, the European Conference of Postal and Telecommunications Authorities, and a committee of that body, which is called Electronic Communications Committee, issued 2 milestones way back in 2011 and 2016 for the use of E164 numbering and for the use of machine-to-machine numbering. Now, at that point, you need to have that seamless type of utilization among countries. These two recommendations are going to be amended. Indeed, there is ongoing a public consultation at the European Union level. By the way, that public consultation is going to be up for the next couple of days, and then the deadline to submit comments to the European Union will be closed. So in case we want to do it, we probably need to hurry up a little bit. But it's interesting to note one point, and that is the fact that the regulation is changing, perhaps not at the same pace and as fast as the technology, but it is actually going in that direction. One last point, we talked about a journey. We still go with something called the Vienna Convention, a 1968 treaty that actually provides that every vehicle must have a driver. Now, the point is that the driver is actually a human being in 1968 and in the mind of those who were actually writing that treaty. But nowadays, that's no longer the case. How can you reconcile that with a system that actually is different? So the good news is that, again, looking at how regulation moves after technology, there is a change in the Vienna Convention, which actually I would define as automated driving system and dynamic control, which again found their way in the Vienna Convention. So to conclude, we heard the expression like software as a service, infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, but we'll hear more and more the MaaS, which is mobility as a service. And on that note, I would like to hand over to Florian, who will explain to us how a company like Emerson transitions from a physical manufacturing hardware into the digital supply world. Over to you, Florian.
Thanks a lot, Raffaele. That was very interesting, and thanks for granting me this opportunity to speak to you today. My name is Florian Hams, and I'm working for a company called Emerson. So we are in the midst of also digital transformation. And so we are probably known to some of you as a company producing hardware and process management and measurement equipment. But our business strategy changes, and as Florian mentioned in the beginning, we move away from just being a hardware company for now being a company providing new technologies for, as our sales pitch would say, improving business operations. So I'm not here today to deliver a sales pitch on our business strategy. I think there are people in my company who would be better placed and more skilled to do that. But I would like to share with you my insights on the job of a privacy professional in an environment which is subject to a lot of change. So, and that, if we look at the title of today's seminar, in a really industrial context, because my company is an industrial company, and that's what we are, and actually what we also need to be in order to understand our customers' needs and expectations. So we are proud to be, but we are transforming into something, delivering more and more, not only equipment, but smart equipment, and that changes the entire way of operating. Now, who says that I'm sure that many of you are also working, or some of you are also working for industrial companies of my type. So it's needless to say that in an industrial company, let's say the appetite for compliance issues is somehow, how should I say it, is somehow moderate. So if you add on top that the many of these industrial companies are very intricate and complicated matrix structures, I think that driving the message of privacy compliance, or be it maybe for other cybersecurity, is probably not on top of everybody's agenda. So in addition, the risk in the area of data compliance, let's call it information governance, is probably not so tangible as in other compliance areas such as FCPA compliance or international trade compliance. So I would like to share with you the way I'm doing my job on a daily basis, where also digital transformation within my job and within my tasks plays an important role. But I think the key for everything we do is to drive a very short, concise, and strong manage in a minimum of time. So I stopped delivering. Well, I still deliver trainings and I deliver presentations and I tell my audience what I need to tell them. But actually, I'm promising people, or I'm having in my mind that I'm delivering elevator pitches, because whenever you talk to people about compliance issues, and if you on top that would be a more remote concern issue like data privacy, you can be sure that information gets lost within 15 seconds. So you have 15 seconds to attract your audience and to show them where you need to act. And basically what I'm telling my people, because my industry is obviously working in the pharmaceutical area, but a lot also in traditional energy sectors. If oil was fueling our industry in the past years, in the future, our industries are, data is the fuel in our industries. And that's what people need to realize. And in order to go this digital transformation towards the customer and towards in its product. So this is the message I need to drive through the organization. And I think the biggest challenge in the area of data privacy compliance is that you need to make it as painless as possible for the organization, but you need to drive, and it's in the core even of privacy compliance and GDPR and other regulations worldwide, that you drive accountability on a local level, on the controller level of many companies. So in my case, that means I need to organize privacy compliance in a very meaningful way and avoid duplication, and I cannot afford a job to be done twice, but this needs to happen, and this needs to create accountability for me, for 240 subsidiaries in Europe and probably 640 worldwide. So that's the challenge I'm facing, and I thought I'd quickly share with you my way of tackling this challenge or addressing this challenge. Maybe some of these things are very obvious to you, and I apologize in advance if what I'm going to say now is obvious to you. But I need to remind myself and my team every day of a kind of 5-step plan, or five very important points which we need to address or to comply with in order to drive our messages and continue beyond the elevator pitch. So first thing is obvious. I mean, that's for any communication. You need to understand your audience and your concerns. That's probably the first point, which is obvious to all of us, I guess. But in an intricate industrial matrix structure, you need to understand what drives the recipient of the message you want to drive, and to understand his or her concerns as a first thing. And the second thing is that people need to understand, and I think we also on this panel in this event today, we are come from different horizons. You clearly need to drive your message, explaining to people what your task is and what you are trying to cover. So we created an information governance roadmap, which is probably not the same for any other company, but in our company it makes sense, which clearly defines my role and the role of my peers who also are in touch with this information compliance exercise. So in the case of Emerson, we have actually, we even visualized that with 3 overlapping circles. Mine is data privacy regulatory compliance, which takes care of all the GDPR requirements, but now also the global requirements in like pill in China, emerging legislations worldwide, which overlaps obviously with cybersecurity and keeping data safe. But obviously, the interest of our data cybersecurity people will not be limited to personal data. So we have a certain overlap, but there is also a separate life these compliance areas have with respect to any kind of business information and probably other information types. And then we have a third circle overlapping again, which is the one of product privacy compliance, which is then supporting the digital transformation on the product side, which also Raffaele has been talking about. So this is probably for us would be the intake of data, which then comes into our environment where I am responsible for keeping the data safe and processing it according to specific principles. So I'm almost out of time. So this was actually my second step. I'll be very quick on the rest. So you need to, during the time you have at your disposal, to drive very clear and simple processes, which need to be clearly defined and have people understand that you are, the more you get heard, and if you are heard at the right moment, that this will ease the pain for ensuring privacy compliance moving forward. And then comes now, how do you do that? That you provide painless processes. This is where we are working on digitalization in my task area. For example, when it comes to mapping out the data flows, we need to find a way of collecting information once on IT applications and then delivering process information for registry of processing activities in a very simple way, so that the effort is done once. So we have a very specific design, for example, of our privacy platform. We are powered by OneTrust. I guess you will have different systems. And this helps us ensuring accountability on a global level. And then also with the help of our trusted attorneys, we are working on a digitalization of our data transfer adequacy mechanism globally. So our what we call the intergroup data transfer agreement will be moving to a digitalized platform in order to make it handleable, in order to tuck in also other world area requirements like China, Brazil, you name it, California, for being able to ensure adequacy. And last thing I wanted to mention, but I'm seeing that I'm already 1 minute over time, so I want to hand it over to Claire as soon as possible. Probably with all you do, you need to be loyal and transparent and drive a message when it comes to Works Council co-determination in Germany, and kind of use these tools for creating a really loyal and transparent field of exercise. So I could probably, don't get me started when I'm talking about this, but I'm handing over to Claire now, apologizing that I ate two of her minutes, but Claire.
Thanks, Florian.
Thank you.
And then Claire, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, Florian, for this valuable insights. I think this is very helpful to understand the overall transformational journeys all the industrials are on now. In my part of the discussion, I want to have a look at the drivers for this journey. What are especially new regulations in the area of cybersecurity, as Florian already mentioned. And so I think it's good to see all these transformational processes like in a more big picture. Where does this regulation come from, and what is really the main driver here? I think we have to go back indeed to the European Green Deal. And for example, parts of it like the EU taxonomy that now really requires all the industrials to fundamentally actually change and transform their businesses. I mean, we have now net zero targets by 2050, and already in 2030, we have to reduce the emissions by 50%. Yeah? And this really, the whole new regulations that come to kind of reach these goals affect really everything, every area of an industrial. Is it about product design and processes, the use of energy? Sure, how can you in the overall business reduce your emissions, but also areas like corporate governance and reporting structures. Yeah, and this really comprehensive and profound transformation. I think we never had such requirements before that really urged industrials to change. That can't go without digital technology and also digitalization of business processes and implementing new solutions that then also goes hand in hand with what the others already said, like the transformation from a typical industrial manufacturing industrial to a service provider in the end. Yeah. And all this is strongly driven by a lot of new laws and regulations, especially in EU level, that really want to force the member states to put their industrials on this journey. We have a complete new set of special and strict data security requirements for certain infrastructure facilities. So that's kind of the setting we're in and the journey everyone has to go on. And I think the NIS 2 directive that came into force in January is a good example of one of these drivers, yeah, where the idea is actually to respond to the growing threats of cyber attacks, yes, in the industry, on the journey of digitalization of our industrials. Where there will be a completely new set of requirements also, for example, for supply chain security, for reporting obligations, supervisory measures, and so on. And like when you think at the NIS directive, it was kind of very restricted to what we see now in the NIS 2 directive, especially when you look at how we considered critical infrastructure and essential facilities in the past. Still, I mean, when you look at the overall sectors, you see energy, water, information technology, transport, all the sectors you would actually expect there. But when you look then in more details, which facilities will now be comprised by the directive, you will quickly see that it's much, much broader than what we have seen in the past, because in these new areas, kind of cybersecurity attacks are expected. Let's take as examples, operator of recharging points are now part of NIS 2 directive. Or if you are involved in the production of hydrogen or storage of hydrogen, for example, as part of your industrial processes, you will be captured. Or also a further example is operators of intelligent transport systems, whatever this means, will be captured. This will also have to be seen how broad this understanding is when we look at the implementation regulation in the member states. And I think good to know is that behind the concept also now broadening the understanding of what is an essential facility or critical infrastructure is closely linked to the new concept or idea of the overall Green Deal, that we have to do kind of sector coupling to reach our net zero targets. It's really about integrating like the energy consuming parts of the industry, like the building sector, transport sector, classical industry, with the power producing sector, yeah. And with this integration, we need more digitalization, as I said, but then we are in the end also more vulnerable for cyber attacks in all these areas. Good examples are, for example, the whole electrification of the transport sector. And we have all seen what is now meant, this, let's say this further integration, in the light of the Ukrainian war, where we the first time really had to deal with the fear actually that there will be a lack of the supply of energy. Yeah. And in the end, now the question is, what does all these new regulations mean for industrials? I think you have to be aware that more and more industry players are now affected by this new regulation. And actually, I can really not imagine when we have to look at the whole transformation journey, that there will be industrials that are not affected. So it's really important that you're aware that this is not something for technology companies, but this is something for everyone. So you really have to look more deeply into the regulations and your business models, and also your future business models on your transformation journey, how they can affect you. Yeah, and for companies, this also means they have to set up completely new departments and internal processes. I mean, you need a completely new risk management, new emergency plan. You have to train your employees. It's about also access control mechanisms, reporting. You have to look at your supply chain. It's really comprehensive what needs to be done within your company. And for sure, this can't be done without the right experts. So in the end, you will need a complete new category of staff and personnel. And here again, I mean, we will definitely see kind of a war of talents already, like the huge technology companies are really striving to get best talent on board to make their transformational processes. But it's also now the industrials that will have to go on this huge journey. So now going back to something more concrete and how a company is on its own very personal transformational journey. So I will now hand over to Sebastian Rockshaw that will give us some insights how Porsche tackles all these issues.
So thank you very much, Claire. I hope you can hear me. Very good. So I think I'm here to talk about how we tackle at Porsche all the new legislation, all the new stuff. I'm a part of a group that is within the legal department, rather new, tackling all the digital stuff. And I would like to give you a rough overview why this is the case, how this evolved, and so I try to do this a little bit on my CV. When I started back 2009 in a law firm, a tech law firm in Munich, I was part of the IP-IT group, and what we did was mainly competition law, but we also did trademarks. So this was already part of IP-IT back then, but we also did software. So this was something that was rather new to me, and we also already did back in 2009 some platforms. 1 year later, a colleague joined from Baker McKenzie back then, who was really deeply involved already in data protection. And so we also started advising on data protection. And I can tell you back in 2010 then, this was nothing someone wanted to pay for. And it was a lot of work, and it was rather new back then. And so compared to what we have today with really big departments advising only in data privacy, this was rather new back then. Then in 2014, I joined Siemens, leaving the law firm, going in-house. So this was when I first came across cybersecurity. So Siemens back then had a really big department for cybersecurity, for the product guys, really big department. This was because in 2010, there was Stuxnet. And so Siemens already had experience with cybersecurity and these big departments, but nobody was really asking the questions. So Sebastian, what is your role in this? And so we started deeper looking into this, asking ourselves, what could be our benefit? And so we asked ourselves, what if there is a vulnerability? Could a vulnerability qualify as defect in the product? Very interesting question. And we wrote an article back then in 2014 about this. We also asked ourselves, what is with product liability? Could there be that a vulnerability become a safety relevant question? And to be honest, all the business guys, they hated me asking these questions because nobody wanted to talk about safety in relation to vulnerabilities. Third question was back then, who in the end is, if something happens, who is responsible? who is really the person who shall look for or who should observe, who is responsible within the company for the for cybersecurity. And the question already back then was, it's the directors, it's the CEOs. And so why do I tell you this? We advised this back in 2014. I wrote an article, I hold presentations all the years and the years. And today, what do we have today? Today we have this, we have the sales directive telling us that vulnerabilities can be defects. We have the new product liability directive telling us that vulnerabilities can be a product liability problem if it's safety relevant. We have the NIST directive NIST directive 2 telling us that the CEO is responsible for this. So everything that was already there back then, we were advising, is now really in acts, in regulations. And so really this became a big thing. And of course, it's a lot of work to do. We're working on most of these topics together with Florian and Claire. And but this is, in the meantime, it's a really big thing. This is the cybersecurity stuff. What else did I do? In 2015, I also advised a service that Siemens still has. It's a cybersecurity service. So you can observe manufacturing facilities for threats. So what are you doing? You are just looking into the data. What is happening? Is something happening that is unusual? You are trying to gather as much information as possible or data as possible, and then you are correlating it. So if Sebastian is accessing at 10 o'clock from Germany and 10 o'clock and 2 minutes, he's accessing from Singapore, something is wrong. But you will only figure this out if you are correlating the data. And back then we are asking ourselves, okay, what do we have to observe when we are providing the service? Because of course, the more data you have, the better it is. And you can ask yourself, so if you're observing the manufacturing facility of Audi, and you are also observing the facility of, for example, Mercedes, you have more data. And then, of course, you can correlate more data and you have more insight seeing whether there is a threat or not. But you have to ask yourself, is this possible? So who owns the data? Is there someone owning the data? Is there something on the data, like is there a trade secret on the data? Is there a copyright on the data? So we ask ourselves all these questions. And today we're talking about the Data Act, right? And so this is like things evolved, like all these questions were already there back in 2015, back in 2014, but now we have all these new regulations, we have all these new laws that we have to deal with. In addition, back in 2014, I have to admit, I've never thought about an electric car, right? Now we have electric cars, and of course, electric cars needs to be sold and electric cars needs to be charged. And this is really a problem, because you're not only selling an electric car today or 1 year in advance, you were only selling cars if you can offer to customers that there is enough charging infrastructure and that you can show them that this will work. So as Porsche, you are offering the customers that they will get that you're also offering MSP services, meaning you will give them a card that they can use to charge. Rather new. You of course have in your Porsche centers, you have charging stations to just show the customer that it's working, how fast it's going, that they are that they will buy a car. All these are new questions that you have to deal with. And of course, if all these new questions come up, you can deal with them in your normal structure that you have, or this is what happens also within Porsche. You will change also the structure of the legal department, and you will have other specialized departments that are working on all these topics, like I do when I came here to Porsche back in 2020, I think. So what I'm doing here is I advise the car IT and to all the car IT, of course, all the data. You have all the cybersecurity questions. I'm also advising of charging, yeah, that is why we changed the structure of the law department to also have specialists in these fields that are then advising all the new digital stuff. So I hope that this gave you a little bit insight on what we are doing and what the challenges were and what the challenges are and how we try to deal with this.
Thanks, Sebastian, and thanks for the walk down memory lane alongside of your CV. There was a couple of things that could have been also taken from my CV. So thank you for that, Sebastian, for the insights how Porsche is dealing with that. And with that, I would hand over to our last panelist, that is Andrea Missetti from our Rome office. So Andrea, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Florian, and thank you, Sebastian. It's always very interesting to see how companies are approaching cybersecurity and how this is impacting also their digital transformation. And actually, this is the name of the game also in Italy now. And so I wanted to continue on this flow of ideas by sharing also our experience with other clients that are having issues in complying and in approaching cybersecurity. Because actually in Italy, we have a very strict cybersecurity legislation, which actually applies to those companies that are identified by the government as being part of the so-called national cybersecurity perimeter. So the government specifically notifies to those companies which carry out essential functions of the state or which provide services which are of fundamental interest to Italy in broad terms, and to Italian population. And if you're notified, if you are included in this national perimeter, cybersecurity perimeter, then you have a list of obligations. Without bothering you with the details, there is, for instance, the obligation to prepare a list of all of your critical assets that you use in providing your services, talking about networks and IT systems, basically. And of course, you need to implement a number of security measures and security standards. Now, what we're seeing is that also companies that have not been included in this perimeter, so were not notified, are asking also our help to comply with these obligations regardless. Because they thought that, okay, we're going in a direction where cybersecurity regulation will always be stricter and stricter. Maybe we will be notified sooner or later. We will have just a few months to comply with these obligations. Maybe it's a good idea to start spontaneously so that we can also use our compliance as a selling proposition to the market. And this is a very interesting type of development because it's a market that embraces cybersecurity, embraces a new regulation, and uses it as a tool, not only to boost its own security standard, its own resilience and cybersecurity level of compliance, but actually uses it also as a differentiating factor to go on the market. And and this is something that we've seen in all of those areas that may be tackled by cybersecurity issues because they are, in sectors that may be at risk. The energy sector, of course, telecommunication sector, the IT sector at large. Mindful of time, I would cut it off here, and I will leave the floor to Florian again for his remarks.
Thank you, Andrea. And with that, as I don't see any question, we would come to the end of our session today. And we hope we gave you some insights on how to advance in your digital transformation journey. And thanks again to our panelists. Thank you, Andrea. Thanks, Claire. Thank you, Raffaele. And special thanks to Sebastian and Florian for joining us. In particular, Florian, you're joining from your holidays. So special thanks to you. And with that, we hope you enjoy the rest of your day and looking forward to our next session. Have a good one.